Right, good evening, everybody. Oh, good evening. So Mr. Smith has now decided to pay attention. I'm only pulling your pulling your leg. So welcome to everybody to this overview and scrutiny. I think before we start, I was quite concerned yet again about the size of the agenda that was originally published. You've only got to look at the next meeting. There's 13 items, which is beyond, our time, capacity. We have narrowed it down quite a bit, but even so, I think it's only right to say I am still massively concerned that we have huge, chunky items that we've got to try and scrutinise. And if we scrutinise properly, we scrutinise properly. We don't pretend to scrutinise. We don't scoot over the main issues. We either scrutinise or we do not. Now, when you are looking at the agenda, service plans, which I'm sure when you've gone through that, unfortunately, I didn't even have my glasses, so I really struggled to read it, but it's huge. And that's important business about, I think I need that actually, Jenny. But this is important business about what the council and what people do for the next 12 months. The last item we will look at will be the carbon neutrality plan. Everything else I've taken off the agenda, which means it doesn't get scrutinised, which I think is a shame for the public. But the carbon neutrality plan will have a discussion at what point of time we will be at. Yeah, we've started early, but we've only can scrutinise for so many hours before we just lose the will to live. If we have to pull it, so be it. But then as a committee, I think we need a discussion about what does that mean and what do we need to do? We can't scoot through it in 30 minutes and say we've scrutinised it if we haven't. And I know there's possibly quite a few concerns. We've got to get this right. So we may have to make some tough decisions, which won't be taken lightly. But I will have everybody's views when we get to that point of the carbon neutrality. If we're getting near to 9 o'clock, then there is, we won't have time to do it. That is, I think, a couple of hours, personally. So sorry about the slight lecture, but I think we've got to be absolutely clear what our role is tonight. Councillor Baker, you want to make a point?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I also want to scrutinise properly. I think it's a hugely important function of this council, especially when you look at the constitution, which we are in the process of amending at the moment. But I do know that the intention was to look at fewer things in certainly the detail that you would want to. So I do want to say that. I won't comment myself on the value of the change, but I think it was made with the best of intentions.
Okay, thank you for that. So we'll crack on and then we'll see how we get on, everybody. So agenda item 1, which is the minutes for the committee held on the 13th of December. They've been published on the council website. Has anybody got any comments about the accuracy or want to make any amendments? No, I'll take them as agreed and I'll sign them in due course. Thank you for that. Item 2, apologies for absence and substitutions. Kim.
Yes, Chairman. We have apologies for absence from Councillor Philip Townsend and Councillor Michaela Wicks. No substitute was available for this evening. And Councillor Sally Dixon is not present at the moment, but she has sent her apologies to say that she will be here, but she's running late.
Okay, thank you. So it's a very select group at the moment. Okay, questions, declarations of interest.
None submitted prior to the meeting, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. And if anybody has whilst we're during the meeting, please shout. Questions from members of the public?
None from members of the public and none from members, Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, so if we go to agenda item 6, which is the committee forward work programme, which is pages 7 to 16. Mark, if you'd be kind enough to take us through, and then we'll open up for questions.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think the first two sections dealing with reports that have already, reports you made at previous meeting are probably quite self-explanatory. But I think it's probably worth noting that it does look like your recommendations have broadly been well received and noted, and in some cases acted upon. So that's encouraging. In terms of part 3 and the upcoming items, I think as you noted, the next meeting is potentially looking like a bit of a monster. I think previous form does suggest a fair number of these items will slip into a future cycle, but there probably is some need to prioritise. So if you as councillors have views about which of these items you are more or less interested in, because I think both the chair and Councillor Baker said probably more scrutiny of fewer items is probably the way to go, rather than trying to dilute that. And just as a final note, the housing allocations task and finish group is making good progress, meeting about every fortnight at the moment, and that's looking like it should be on schedule to deliver a report to the next meeting.
Okay, thank you. Views from people before I've got a couple of comments, but any views? Councillor Coburn.
It's just a small point, but one thing that, you know, this council does slightly differently from other committees I sit on is gives, you know, quite long presentations when we've had the papers for some time. And I think we've got to wean ourselves off having a presentation in writing, having the written report, and then sort of repeating that, because the time sometimes that we spend on hearing a presentation, whereas if we do what we should do as a scrutiny committee, which is sit down and go line by line through the agenda, then really and truly we shouldn't need in-depth presentations. We need the officers around for the questions, but I think we could save some time if we disciplined ourselves to really get to grips with the papers before we come into the meeting.
Couldn't agree more, but to say we can only do what we individually do by reading the papers. We, you know, and sometimes in the previous meetings we've had questions, and the answers are staring them in the face in the papers. So yeah, absolutely right. Couple of points, page 11. I think, Zach, thank you for the first one, which was the percentage that was asked for, which was good. That was a percentage on which is buildings or hard standards. So thank you for that. Councillor Else, there was, I know you had several emails with Kelvin regarding the no mow May, and did you get to a point where you're satisfied with the answer? So you didn't.
Not really, no. I sort of gave up after a while. I'm sorry, but there is no answer really to it. It is what it is. And I'm told that the, I can't think what they call Continental, were doing other things. I can't argue with that. If they tell me they were doing other things, I can't argue with that. I can't say that was not what they should have been doing. So we were just going round and round and round, really. So I just had to accept that they were doing something.
Okay, so agree to disagree. Well, okay. I think we'll move on, but obviously it was disappointed you didn't get an answer that was satisfactory, but okay. Now on to page 12, which was the planning enforcement. Now that obviously is on the document says January 2022, which obviously isn't the case because we're not expecting Zach to do an update on what we're doing. That just needs to be rescheduled. Probably won't be March because we've already got 13 and I don't want to add a 14th. So we just need to change the date. So Zach, have you got any update when that's likely?
Yeah, just to say we're working very much on the local planning enforcement plan update. The last local planning enforcement plan was dated 2013. So we're working on that, and then we'll need to take that through the various bodies, so through the portfolio holder, through executive briefing, and then on to ONS. Had thought March, I think Mark was going to say, but obviously I'm cognizant of what you're saying about the heavy agenda, and I think it's very important that you do scrutinise that very important piece of work. So if you felt that it wasn't going to be possible to do that in March, you could either do it as a separate meeting, or we could delay till what, May would it be? June.
Okay.
It doesn't change the way we work specifically. It's not as though we're not going to be enforcing in the meantime. It's just about the review of an understanding of what members want us to do and taking it forward.
Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair. I regard planning enforcement really of the highest priority. It is because we make sure that people who do not want to comply by the rules actually are obliged to. And in fact, planning enforcement officers have just had a resounding victory on a particular appeal, which I was very pleased to see. But I do think that we should look at this as promptly as we can, bearing in mind the pressures on our, the business that we have to do. I'd much rather see it before May, in other words. Thank you.
Okay. Well, what we'll need to do is we'll have to risk assess the 14 items and probably pick about 4, which is, the 2 hours that we're supposed to have allocated. We've got important things like the environment bill. There's lots of stuff, and we'll just have to make some sort of risk assessment and which is the most time critical. Because that's how we're going to have to do it now, which is time critical and where we're going to best spend our time during this meeting. Councillor Else.
Thank you, Chairman. I thought that what we agreed is a good way to move forward was to have working groups. And so if there's something that's really, really essential and can't wait until, in someone's opinion, until later, maybe we could look at having a working group looking at it and reporting back. At least that way, A, it relieves the actual meeting time-wise a little bit and content-wise, and B, it kind of does focus on a particular issue. Just a thought.
I know it's a very wise thought as well. We just need people who can give their time to do the working parties and work, so if we have a number of people who are wishing to do that, maybe they can do that with Zach, and Mark can coordinate. So Zach, would you be happy with that initially?
I'd be very happy with that, yes, in principle. I was really just going to say, if it helps focus your sort of discussions and thoughts, March should be eminently doable if that was seen as the priority. That was what I was working to, the date. So yeah, very happy to sort of perhaps get your feedback, post-meeting about how you want to take this forward. Thank you.
Okay, well, we'll see how we get on tonight, what gets taken over. Then I will speak to Mark and the Vice Chair, and we can then try and think about the next meeting and what can and can't. If it can't and it's felt to be time critical, then we'll have a working group, which would be really good. And obviously we want a wide spread of volunteers to go on that in and outside this committee. Okay. Last couple of page 13, which is obviously the agenda for the next meetings. I think everybody can just see how big that is. On the task and finish group. Does anybody have any additional items before we move on to the next agenda? Okay, I shall take silence as golden then. Okay, this is probably the sort of the real chunky bit of work, which I have to admit took me hours to go through and try and work out this, which is the service plans, which is pages 17 to 76. I think Nora is going to introduce. And then I've got the heads of service to outline their sections, but I don't think we want to spend too long. I'd like to just go through the different sections or outcomes and then just ask people whether they've got comments and does it make sense to them? Because I know there's quite a few where I thought, well, I'm not really sure what that means. So Nora, if you want to start off and then maybe we'll go straight to the sections and then the heads can answer the questions as we go through it. So Nora, could you start, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. So coming back to Councillor Coburn's point, I'll just very quickly highlight what we are asking the councillors to do. So there will be 5 service plans for you to look at this evening. We'll start with commercial services, going to environmental services, housing operations, housing delivery and communities, finishing with planning as well. When we try to count the time for this meeting, we kind of allocated 10 to 15 minutes for each of the items. So heads of service will do a very brief introduction and then we'll open up for questions. We'll try to take as many questions as possible, but it's possible that because of the time constraints, we might need to come back to them at some other point after the meeting to the members. So I think that is all from me. Unless there's some specific format questions throughout the meeting, I'm happy to step in and answer them as well.
Thank you, Nora. My plan is, and if people are happy, when you look through the document, it's got outcome 1, outcome 2, etc. Rather than get a load of presentations, we go to each one. If people have got questions, then we can answer the questions and then move on. I think it's probably the best way, because otherwise we do presentations, then we're going to have to keep going back and forward to different outcomes. So outcome 1. So if you look at outcome 1, which is on, looks like page 21. Have we got any questions or clarity required on outcome 1? Okay, I'll take that as none. Outcome 2, which goes across onto the next page. Outcome 3. Okay, outcome 4. Stunned into silence. So outcome 5.
I've got a question. It's just that it ends in mid-sentence. So it goes something about for the digital. It doesn't say what digital.
Okay, we'll get that clarified in a minute. On this one, which is probably going to be Kelvin, as I found with a lot of these, it doesn't really say what success is. The last box on the right-hand side is success is measured, demonstrated by, and then doesn't say what that actually means on some of them. So I'm guessing, Kelvin, where it says the number of Careline customers actually means we're improving that, we're increasing that, and we're going to measure that against the previous 12 months. Am I correct?
Yes, Chair, that's exactly correct.
Okay. Councillor Baker, hello there.
Apologies, I got here as soon as I could, one of those things. Yes, outcome 3. I think the wording is a bit misleading in that it says, work with elected members, officers and community stakeholders to achieve a positive future for the Museum of Farnham, ensuring the service has a home fit for the future. Okay, so there's 2 things here. Obviously, we've got the problem of the housing of the museum, and we've got the museum collection itself. As far as I know, we've not taken a decision on the collection. So I think it's premature to say we're ensuring service has a home fit for the future, since at the moment, we've not taken any decision to change what is currently the status quo. And this seems to be premeditating or signposting that a change is afoot. And also, I think what's in the column 6 is also not very clear. And it says future sustainability of the museum service and further deterioration of the building. As far as I remember from last year, and that was a long time ago, I didn't think this committee had anything to do with the building anymore. So this is confusing, and we don't really want to go there, do we?
You're right in your recollection that when we was in the previous structure, we were going to only consider the actual contents, and we weren't going to be the decision makers in relation to the building, because that was going to be about assets and everything else. So it was going to be split. I'm not sure with the 2 structure, who will, I'm guessing it will still go to resources because it's a finance. So the building, i.e. because it's money and it's a resource and it's an asset, will go to the other overview and scrutiny committee. Of course you can.
If I can just come back once more as well, I also, where it says in the, for the Borough Memorial Hall, it says higher opportunities, invigorate, etc., increased and more usage. So there's definitely a promotional tone to what the outcome for Memorial Hall and Borough Hall is. For the Farnham Museum, there's no such positivity here. They're just talking about a positive future. I mean, this makes it sound really bleak. I would really like them to say, we're going to increase activity, reinvigorate the collection, etc., and have the same sort of approach to the Farnham Museum, and as opposed, you know, to make it into a thriving, you know, museum, like you've got a thriving communities fund for the Arts, Cranley Arts Centre. Why can't we not have the same positive approach to the Farnham Museum?
Okay, your point is well made. I mean, obviously this is a work programme, so it's an internal document to sort of outline the work that's going to be done. Yeah, I don't want documents rewritten just to change the terminology, as long as we know what the expectation is on that. I think if Mark can check to make sure that the resources select committee, I think is that title we're calling them now, that they have the mantle of the actual building and asset and finances.
Yes, I think we're still calling it policy for the time being, but yes, if a report comes on the building as a physical structure, that would probably come from Peter Vickers' team. Therefore, that would fall within policy's remit for the time being, at least.
Okay, and I'm guessing then the second part of that, the actual physical items from the museum will sit within this one. So it will get split, but we've got to make sure neither fall between the cracks. Councillor Coburn, did you want to say something?
Well, just very briefly, because, you know, I mean, for what this is, I think the wording is perfectly adequate. I mean, at some point, we've got to split the service from the building, because the two cannot stay together for much longer. One or other is going to collapse under the weight. So, you know, as far as I can see, that's perfectly adequate wording to see that it does have a home fit for the future. We don't know where that home might be, but we certainly don't want the museum as a service to disappear. So I would have thought, I wasn't going to comment on it, you know, I think it's perfectly adequate for what it's actually saying, which is safeguard the museum service.
Thank you for that, Kim.
Can I just, I'm going back, Councillor Darcy, with your mid-sentence, it is after digital switchover in 2025.
Thank you for that. No, I agree. This is a work programme, and you know, we could all put different terminology onto it, but it's actually what is it likely to achieve and what is it intended to achieve. So I think it's not our place to start going through that. I don't think we have got time. But your point's well made. Mark will check to make sure the other part is on their work programme, so nothing falls between the cracks. Okay, so we were on, Councillor Wells, please.
Thank you. So we were on Careline. And I'd just like to ask a quick question. So this is very laudable, very good plan. But what concerns me here, and I'd just like some reassurance, is the staffing levels, the resources to provide this level of service with this outcome, promised outcome. I know that the staff team was diminished, or at least I think it was. I'd just like confirmation on that. And how do we intend to provide this level of promised service with the existing resource? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Kelvin Mills, if you'd like to respond.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Presently, we are fully staffed, so we have a full staff team. But Councillor Else is correct. We have struggled with recruitment in the past. So to deal with this additional challenge post-COVID, we are looking to recruit further staff to help deal with the growth in numbers. So we are currently out to advert for additional support to deliver the Careline service.
Well, I think that's excellent news that we all fully endorse. Anything else on outcome 5 before moving on? If not, outcome 6. I've got to and again, it's something that's consistent for this document. On the second one, I've just scribbled in, so what's the percentage increase? Because it says there's a better balance of public opinion received. I'm not really sure what that means and how you can actually manage that. So I think that probably needs to be looked at. Any other comments on outcome? Councillor Darcy.
Yeah, it was just it says the main project to be completed by 31st of 3rd, 22, and then the end date's October 24. So that's slightly confusing in 6.2.
Yeah, so Councillor Darcy, that's referring to the fact we will carry out and complete sort of the cut-in regime and how it will and make the adjustments, but it will take probably until the end of the term of contract with the ground maintenance contractor to fully sort of implement all of those changes.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I take it the policy stroke resources we'll be looking at, will they, Kelvin? Rather, that won't come to us when you've done your amendments and what it's going to look like. Where will that go to?
No, I'd envisage it coming to this ONS, Chairman. It's regarding sort of how we deal with the cut-in regimes in the countryside and in the town, so that there's a clarity on sort of increasing biodiversity in certain areas, but making sure there's a cut-in regime suitable for town centres. So I'd imagine it's a service provision. So I'd hope to bring it back to this committee if that's possible.
I'm sure it is, and I'm sure there's people here will be delighted to receive that. We'll add it to the list as the list gets bigger. So yes, no, I think you're right. Actually, as you articulated that, it should come back here as a service. We just need to try and slot it in. So I think that would be one for discussion. Councillor Dixon.
Not sure whether or not this comes under outcome 6 or outcome 7. They're both green spaces. But it seems to me that what's missing from this is where we are encouraging public participation and promoting service activities. We're not looking at the safety of our green spaces. And I talked with experience of Farnham Park, where the paths have not been renewed in several years. And due to the hot summers we've had, some of the paths have cracked, and the cracks are quite wide now, which if you're not steady on your feet, or it can be quite dangerous if it's slippy. And so where in this do we look at, I mean, for somewhere like Farnham Park, I think there's quite good funding for keeping the paths maintained. Where is that in this output? Do we not monitor that?
Okay, not sure who would be the best person to.
So, sorry, Chairman, if I jump in there, I recognise Councillor Dixon's comments there, and I'll make sure I reflect the health and safety checks that we do in the management of our countryside sites. It should fit under our countryside management plans for each of the parks. Certainly Farnham Park has a management plan, and we would be planning to do those pathways, but I'll take on board that it's not referenced here clearly. So I'll make sure safety was brought in.
Thank you. And I think where it says level of volunteer work is kept the same, I think we should be a little bit more ambitious than that, but we should at least try and increase that. Anything else in outcome 7 before moving on? Okay, outcome 8.
Just one more thing. I was in the parks the other day, as I am most weeks. And one thing I have noticed is the bins that Waverley provides, both in the parks and by bus stops and everything, are quite old fashioned. And I'm wondering whether or not we should be thinking in line with our environmental strategy to be starting to replace bins with, triage bins where you can put your recycling and non-recycling. And also some of the bins don't have lids on them, so they have got the foxes that come at them, and then they spread the rubbish all over the place, which makes twice as much work for everyone. So should we, one, the bin should have a lid of some sort on it or a roof, and then 2, the bin should have a recycling option. And we've got a programme for replacing all of our bins of that, or was that somewhere in the for the green spaces?
Okay, well, it's probably not visible, but I'm sure Kelvin has noted that point, and Mark will make a note of it as well, so it will go into our feedback. So we're on outcome 8 as far as I can see. Any views on 8? Vice Chair, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure what I understand by the phrase influence on delivering the climate emergency action plan. Is there some measurable quantity that this feeds into the action plan?
Okay, thank you for that. And I've made myself some notes. Again, in the last box saying, but the financial environmental benefits need to be measured. It's just a little bit wishy-washy. So if we can, I'm sure our colleagues are making notes of those, but I thought it was very wishy-washy and measure what and what does it look like? Anybody got any other views? Councillor Forashewski.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It kind of links in nicely with outcome number 7 with regards to the green spaces. And if we look at CS 8.2, we talk about the climate emergency having some impact. I happen to think that the green spaces and the green flags awards are really, really positive things. And I note in the report, that there's not everybody's aware of it, or how can they do these things. And I know in Cranley we've got a particular one that's very, very good. There's a mention here of the emergency climate bill under this one, but there isn't with the green spaces in terms of the green flag. And I actually think those two are linked. And I'm just wondering if there's a possibility that that engagement could be looked into. So as it's a way of encouraging our residents to take up the opportunity of getting the award of green flags, because there's a lot of green spaces in, and tie it in nicely to the climate bill change. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for that again. Hopefully Kelvin's made notes to pass on so that can be amended, and Mark will be scribbling through that book, be filling that book up. Anything else on 8 before we move substantially on to 9? No, so outcome 9. My first comment is on the first one, which is CS 9.1. Success is the council exposure to risk minimised. I think it's a bit more than looking after trees isn't just about our risk. I think there's got to be a greater success by having a tree risk management guide and what it actually brings to the communities having these trees. Any other views on outcome 9? Councillor Baker.
Yes, forgive me if this isn't terribly relevant. What occurs to me is that there are trees growing on highways land within a metre of the highway. I believe they're owned by highways. I just don't know quite where tree risk inspections would fit in with those trees. It's just a thought, because this all relates to Waverley, but there are trees that I would have thought are the responsibility of highways. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because there's a tree on highways land that threatens my house if it falls down.
Normally, highways has a meter from the road is classed as highways. That's not always the case, but that's the majority of the case. If it is a tree and it's a highways tree, bear in mind people sometimes plant stuff when they shouldn't do, then it should be a highways issue, or at least they would say whether it's their land or not. So through the county council, through the local board member, absolutely, it's, you know, make sure it, you know, let me know and I can check to see whether it's highways or Waverley. But I don't want to get into specific cases. So
No, I know, I realise that, Chair. Sorry to come back.
so that's absolutely fine. Any other views on number 9 before moving on? Okay, outcome 10. Councillor Darcy.
The first one was just to say that in 10.1, the high level stewardship, etc., those schemes, as far as I'm aware, have come to an end or coming to an end and are being replaced by the environmental land management schemes, which, given the end date is 2025, I think will be in place by then. So perhaps I need to include the ELM in that. And then 10.3, it just seemed to me that it was delivering action plans on 3 different policies, which have quite a lot of actions. It seems an awful lot for 1 point.
Okay, so I'll add my 2 pennies worth on those ones, and then if anybody else. So on the 10.1, there's no real target there. You know, are we've got a target, we're going to deliver them. Are we going to have an increased target, or is a target that we just deliver them? I always think it's good if we can try and challenge ourselves to increase the number of schemes. The 10.3 that you raised, it says action plans delivered in accordance with policy. Does that mean if we produce a poor action plan or a poor strategy, by producing it is success? Success has got to be producing an action plan that has tangible benefits to Waverley and can be measured and success seen. And Kelvin will probably be smiling because he knows from previous years, I do not like action plans that don't have proper targets and are wishy-washy. I don't like when it says action plans delivered. Well, that means nothing. We can deliver anything. We want action plan with clear benefits that can be measured against previous years, so we can see what success is. Because if we have to then review this, how do we know whether it's successful or not? What does success look like? You know, often just an increase compared to the previous 12 months. Then we've got something to measure against. So I do think those ones, in my view, 10 just need something that we can measure it on or know how we're going to do that. Anything else on number 10? Okay, this is hard work, this is going to be. Number 11. Any views on number 11? Councillor Coburn.
It's just really more of the same, isn't it? I mean, we need to be much more active in this. We are building all these houses. We are still losing pitches and playing spaces, even though we've put in that we, you know, not only do we want to protect what we've got, but we want to enhance and then provide more. So, as you say, action plans delivered. There's no point in having an action plan if we've not actually worked out exactly how we're going to deliver that action plan. So it is back to this deliverability. I mean, the easiest thing in the world is to have a meeting. The next second sort of easy thing is to write a, you know, report. We can all do that. It's quite fun, you know. But when you've actually got to deliver it, it's a totally different set of skills. And, you know, I am worried about this not being quite firm enough to ensure that we do get delivery. Probably, I don't know, through the planning process, perhaps.
No, and they're very good points. And if there are other locations that can be sort of examined, how you measure it, we don't know because it's not in the document, even if it said refer to this document for targets and measurements. I think something Mark would need to take away, that a lot of this is, you know, the stuff that we want to do, but if we're going to scrutinise and check it in 12 months' time, I don't know what success looks like. Does it mean having the same number of pitches, or does it mean actually increasing the number of pitches? And I just think that very basic measurement we need. Anything else on number 11?
Sorry, Chair. Could I just, well, my apologies. It's difficult to jump in. Apologise, I couldn't be there this evening. But obviously, the detail the committee are bringing forward here are laid out very smartly within each of those action plans that have gone through scrutiny, executive and council. Would you feel it more comfortable if those action plans perhaps had links on the service plan so that you could see the detail? Because the questions you're asking are laid out clearly within those action plans. But obviously we've just referenced them here. We could put a link on or a specific page for the next year.
No, I think that would be very useful.
Okay.
Because as I've gone through each one of these, I've looked at how we're going to look at this in 6 months' time or 12 months' time. And we can only review what we're given to review. And if it's not there, we don't know whether the targets that have been set are targets that we think are suitable. Because the whole point of this process is we may disagree with the targets. So I think there does need to be a little bit of work on to make sure we're happy with what success and how we demonstrate it. Now, whether that is at, within a couple of weeks, you resend a document with some links, but unfortunately means that we got to go through it this way because we have no idea. And some, I'm sure, will have very good targets. Some will be, you know, the delivery of a strategy. Well, no, because I can deliver a very poor strategy. So we're going to have to do some work outside. Now, I've got a couple of people, Councillor Reid put a hand up first, then Councillor Else. If I miss anybody when you want to talk, because I've got a screen and I'm trying to look, please shout.
I think we're talking in, this group is talking in very much general terms and generalizations, which is what we've been presented with. As Kelvin says, there are action plans and progress steps. And for instance, the one on the sports facilities is covering 5 years, isn't it? From 2020 to 2025. Well, a lot happens in that 5 years, you know, with all sorts of processes and changes maybe of, you know, who takes overall control after the next elections. So I think we're talking in very general terms, and I think the idea of changing the ONS committees is to focus. But how we do this is perhaps what we should be talking about rather than going through this in so much detail.
Okay, but we are, in a sense, giving our approval to a service plan for the whole of Waverley for the bits that we're responsible to scrutinise, and I can't see how we're going to do that. That's our role. It's, you know, it's a non-political role. This is about how do we make sure those action plans deliver what they're supposed to deliver, the actions and the KPIs and performance is appropriate, and that we can use that to challenge. So if we don't go through this, we're basically saying without that information, we'll accept it. Yeah.
Perhaps it might be a good idea, and because that's what I thought we were going to do tonight, to look at what do we want to focus on. So if this is an overview, you know, do we want to focus in more detail on a certain area and ask for a report on that in more detail?
Okay.
Because what we're doing is being very general. We're generalizing in our comments, aren't we?
Okay.
That's the problem, I think.
I have other comments? I saw a couple of hands up. I can't remember who it was. Councillor Darcy. Well, they've got the Councillor Wells first, and then we're going to do Councillor Dixon and then Councillor Darcy.
Thank you, Chairman. All I was going to say was the only thing we can measure from this document that we've got in front of us now is whether it's failed or not. We can't measure whether it's been successful or not because we've got a very definite indication of the failure, the impact of the failure of any of these initiatives, but we haven't got. So I think we need to be very careful not to concentrate on the negative, which is difficult to do because we haven't got a positive to follow. Do you see what I'm saying or not? You're looking a bit pun there. Well, it's very clear to me that if the initiative fails, then we've got, for example, outcome 11, if they don't do if they don't take the actions that they describe here, then the impact of not doing it is loss of outdoor sports facilities. That's negative. That's what's going to happen. And that's the only thing for sure that we know. If they don't do this, that will happen. If they do this, we aren't told what will happen. That's my point. It's a very negative document to me, this whole document.
Yeah, and if we do achieve, we're not really sure then what does success look like? All we know is what failure looks like. So, and that's my concern. We need to know what we're trying to achieve so we can actually aim to succeed rather than fail. Councillor Dixon.
Yeah, I think I think I agree with what everything's come before. If I saw an action plan, I would want to see 3 things in it for both the sports and for the play centres, which is the next one. We want a map where they all are and a list, and then basically when were they last checked? When are they next going to be checked, and what the score is? Is it a 5 out of 10? Is it a 10 out of 10? And how is there anything that's broken? And also from walking around Farnham, I think quite a lot of the play and sports facilities are very degraded from a lot of use, and obviously we've all been tied up doing COVID things, so and staff being off and all the rest of it. There's a lot of work that needs doing to catch up, really.
Thank you for that, Councillor Darcy.
I can see that having a link would be a really good idea because the action plan is scrutinised elsewhere, isn't it? We're scrutinised either by us on another occasion, or in some cases haven't been written yet. So it would be unreasonable to expect them to detail it in here. So I think a link to that would be good. But my point, I think, with outcome 10 was that there were 3 different action plans under one 10.3, and I thought it should be broken into 3 separate items, really, so that each one refers to one action plan.
Okay, I'm sure that point is being taken on board. I mean, bearing in mind we're only on page 25 and there's probably another 30 pages to go. You know, I think virtually each and every one we're going to be saying, well, what does that mean? You know, I've got points all the way through to saying yes, but and what? So I'd be interested in people's views, you know, how we actually progress this, because I just think it's quite lacking detail, or we don't know where to get what that detail is. Councillor Coburn, I think you were first.
I think what we're all asking for is a how column, isn't it? You know, we've got a what happens if it doesn't happen, but we haven't got a how column, so we don't know how. And I suppose you could say through the action plan, but you know, I mean, we're not pinpointing in any of the service plans who and how this will be delivered. And then after that, you know, the consequences of not delivering it. So I just think that's really what our frustration is, that, you know, we understand the aims and the aims are great, but we've no means of understanding. Now, if Kelvin's telling us it's all spelt out properly in the action plan, I've just been trying to find them easily and I haven't. So I don't know where they are, but if the action plan says, right, we're going to do this, this, this and this, then at least I can understand that. If the action plan is a wish list, a bit like this, then it's not going to solve the problem because we don't know how. You know, it's back to that, you know, when you deliver a project, you have to know how you're going to deliver the project. You can't just think about it or write about it. You actually have to roll your sleeves up and deliver it. And that's the bit that I can't see looking at this. It's the how.
Mark, did you want to come in?
Yes, I was wondering if, as you observe, there may be kind of recurring themes to some of the comments on them, whether maybe you wanted to have a sort of general set of recommendations about the sort of formatting and content and that kind of thing. And then if there are particular concerns about particular recommendations, to highlight those separately, but instead of repeating the comments for multiple outcomes, just having one set of recommendations for the document as a whole.
I think that makes sense, because I think we could spend another couple of hours and the same themes are going to be coming up, and we still won't know how you're going to do it and what actually does success really look like. So we're not just talking about the negatives. I think I saw a hand up, Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with a lot of what's been said, but I think Councillor Mills has said that and I've said, I think we should prioritise. So maybe a summary after we've all said things, and then choose a priority that we focus on. And in that way, we can move forward. Thank you.
I don't always see your hand come up because I've got this screen here, so my apologies. Make sure it goes up high enough for me. Oh, I didn't see that. I think we're not, I think our views are probably fairly consistent, that we want the how and more detail on success, because we've got to say the negatives. So what is success? Is it to increase the numbers? Is it, because when it says just to deliver a strategy, no. It might be to deliver a strategy and the action plan and to hit the targets contained within the action plan. And it's quite clear that's what we want. So are there other main items that you want to raise? So sort of themes that you want to raise so we can do it in one go. So we've included the how. We want to include the how they're going to do it. More information about, so what does that mean and what are they going to achieve? Like increased numbers for Careline, for example, et cetera, et cetera. And there are bits within this document that really do that. I was looking at some of the improvements in recycling rates. 2 seconds. I can see your hand though. If you looked on page 40, the recycling rates, the success is clearly set out. Recycling performance reaches X%. Rejection rate falls below 10%. We have got something to say. That is what success is. So in 12 months' time, we can look at the figures and see whether it's achieved it or not and why. So that page, virtually sort of page 40 and 41, the top three performance indicators met. Well, we know, so there's performance indicators, they're going to be met. And so to me, that's what I'm looking for. So we've got a clear idea what success is. So have we got any themes that we want to add to the how? What does it actually mean, and more on that success? So the document can be worked up a little bit more. Councillor Mary.
Actually, I think that's a good way forward, but I think you should start off with the why. What are we doing it for? Then that leads into the other topics.
Okay, yeah. Councillor Dixon and Councillor Wojciechowski.
I think you're absolutely right, Kevin. I think it's very interesting to see what's on pages 42 and below, because where we've got things like for the sports facilities, action SP 22 CS 11, we're going to write an action plan for the delivery of the playing pitch strategy. And actually, that's not really what we want to see. We want to say 75% of the playing pitches are grade 8 and 10% are being renewed, or 15% are being renewed every 6 months, or something. So there's a list as opposed to just writing an action plan, because we're not quite sure what the action plan is, sorry.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. A lot of the points you've made, I entirely agree with you, because if I'm being totally honest, when I sat at home and looked through this, there was a part of me that just lost the will to live. And then I ended up finding that I didn't look at it as well as I should have done, because it just didn't make as much sense as it could have done, because there was a lot of repetitiveness there and I wasn't sure what it was trying to achieve. But I would say the officers have put a huge amount of work in producing this document and giving us this information. And I think they've tried to be all things to all men. And I think there was a much more simpler way of delivering this document than in the way it is at the moment. It's like don't miss any of the dots over the I's, or don't miss any of the crosses over the T's. You've got to get it all in there. But I think what that's done is diluted the quality of the document by making it a bit too complex. I think there was a lot of things that we could have done to simplify it. But I appreciate the amount of work that's gone in, and I can appreciate the amount of pressure that people are under to deliver this. But I think your point is well made, that if a document of like this, it's not going to be scrutinised properly because there's just too much information. It doesn't make sense to the layperson or anybody reading this document online. One of the things that when I look at it, and again, it's repeated over and over again, is the deliverability. The other thing that I would say is there are strategies in here that are sound, robust and working. You know, we don't need to keep going over them because they're there. So we don't almost need to measure them because they're there and we know they're working. But at the same token, there's elements when I look at the plague strategy and green spaces, you know, about deliverability in the real world. We know that that's not going to happen because finances are of, you know, there's only a finite amount of resources out there that will deliver on some of the projects that we aim to complete. And also when we look at where some of the resources come from there in terms of SIL, we know that some SIL is not designated to some of the projects, even though the pot may be big, but it's not going to go as big as this document is. So whilst I utterly agree with the officers that they put a lot of work into this document, I think it's almost been, it could have been simplified because there's too much information here without, as I say, some of the key issues that would make it simplified for us to actually make a decision here tonight on some of those issues that you've raised. Thank you, Chairman, for your indulgence.
And thank you for that. And I would echo that the huge amount of work that's gone into this. You know, whoever had the delight of having to type this all in must have worn out their fingers. Although I did slightly smile on ES 10.1, and it says the emergency plans in place. I think it was supposed to mean in place. I'm sure we should have an emergency plan for the police to keep them under control. But, you know, sometimes scrutiny appears to be overly critical, but scrutiny is actually to go through it to see where we can do things different, better. And so please don't take it as a personal criticism. Louise, would you like to come in?
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you for your comments, all of which are incredibly helpful and will only help to improve the document. But I just wanted to say that this is a management document as well, and that all these actions are extremely important in part of our performance management system, going right down to each member of staff at times, because they're the people delivering this day to day. So I know it's got a lot of detail in it, and maybe this isn't necessarily always the right audience, but bear with us, because I think your general points about what is success and what does it look like, I think we can need, you know, smarten those up, definitely, Chair. But bear with us, because a lot of this detail is important for the members of staff who are carrying out the actions. Thank you.
Councillor Dixon.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. If this is the management document, and I'm sorry, I've got to come back to the, I'm sorry, you're going to hate me. I've got to come back to the Farnham Museum, because if the management team, their only objective is to move the collection for this year, then that's really disappointing. I mean, if that's the only thing they're worrying about, I mean, that's really, really disappointing, because the museum should be a vibrant asset within our community, whether or not it's got scaffolding outside or not. And, you know, it should be the two things, trying to keep it going and possibly at some point move it. But nobody knows where it's going to go to. So, you know.
Okay, I hear your views and I've heard it. Councillor Baker, and then I'll make a comment.
Thank you. I mean, I'm sure you want to bring this to a conclusion, Chair, but could I just add, I had the thought, what happens if, and where do we deal with this if we disagree about the success and the measurement of success and whether it's the right thing? I have an example in mind, but it's the principle that counts.
I suppose we'd have to look at the constitution, whether it's a committee or somebody disagrees and we just note their disagreement to what success looks like. I suppose we need to, because I don't think it's 30 odd pages. I think, you know, that is just too much to go through, knowing that we've raised these comments. It's just going to be repeating it. Louise, you've heard the sort of the general way that we would like some additional information to make it easier. What sort of timescales? Because then I think we can make a decision whether it comes back to the next meeting, which means something else will have to follow, or we send it out with that additional information, that commentary, and then people can make specific comments. I'm just trying to work out whether we're going to need another meeting. We can do it by email, which will obviously cause a lot of email, or whether we need to bring it back. So it's just your views.
I think, Chairman, as much as possible, if we can do it with specifics through email, and then we've got the sort of the wording in front of us that you may want, or we can at least do a sort of virtual sort of discussion via email that way. I mean, we have got to sort of, the best thing is to take your comments back to the executive as from this committee. So somehow we've got to achieve that in a sort of an effective way.
And sort of timescales.
I might ask Nora. Nora, when has this got to be finally done in order to get it to executive?
The recommendations will have to go out by Friday this week, to kind of to be joined with the paperwork. But I'm not sure if there's a mechanism to submit special late papers as well. Kim might be able to help us out if the members will require it a bit more time to do it.
Well, I don't think we're going to be able to go through the whole complete document, nor would you be able to do the work by Friday. So that's not going to happen. Mark?
I can write the quite general recommendations. It looked like there were 5 of them. Also about things like including Lynn, setting out kind of a positive vision of success. I can do those quite quickly. If you want to check them before Friday, that can be available by then.
Okay, if we can circulate that before Friday, it's whether that's going to be sufficient time for the document will still be in the same format, and that's my concern. So it will still go in the same format to the executive and continue its journey. So, Councillor Else, was there anybody else who wanted to? Councillor Darcy.
Thank you. Yeah, just what interested me was the outcomes and how they were derived. I probably should know, but I don't. And also the fact that some of the outcomes are very specific and very measurable, and some are very aspirational, and some are just sort of kind of vague. And I just wondered where they, because they were, to me, I'd like to see a list of all the outcomes. No doubt they are somewhere, and I've put them in the plan, the thing that we review, the programme. But yeah, they seem to be really different. You know, some are clear, precise, and some are just, oh, it'd be nice if culture was jolly, you know, everybody was happy.
No, I totally agree. I mean, some of the pages, you've got some excellent measurements, and you can see success straight away, and you can see it's a percentage, an increase or decrease. You know, they're very, very clear. And I agree. The problem is some of the others, it's, well, we'll produce a strategy, or we'll try and engage better. Well, what does that mean? And I think that's one of the points we're trying to get across, is you can't really measure that. How do we measure engagement? Unless it's, well, you've dealt with X amount of people, certain amount of meetings, you've consulted with X amount of people, then you've got a clear way of saying how you engaged. So I agree with you, and hopefully that will be, that's be noted as well. Councillor Else.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to be brutally honest, and I feel as someone, a member of this committee, that this document has set us up to fail. We cannot, whoever thought we could possibly scrutinise all of this is mistaken. We can't, and we have to accept that we can't. It's just impossible. And I have some sympathy with Councillor Reid, whose point was that we should be focusing on particular things. We can't look at a whole year's work, a whole 5-year programme. We just can't do it. We need something a bit more substantial to look at. We haven't even got time to go through 70 pages, you know, one by one. We can't look at everything. So I feel as if I've been set up to fail here. I have failed. I cannot scrutinise this, and I don't think anybody can. Thank you.
Councillor Reid.
Well, according to your instructions, I did read every word, and it taxed my eyesight, I might tell you. But I still think, and I did put asterisks by certain things, and to share them with you, the one thing I would like personally to concentrate on is page 31, ensuring that utility companies are managed when they approach the council in regards to working on the council's land, wayleaves and easements. And all these, you know, we've got problems with highways, we've got problems with Thames water, and I really, you know, do think that this is something that we should concentrate on. And how are we managing it as a council, working with other councils and other authorities and utility companies? It is, I think, part of our duty because we're representing members who are very concerned about all this. Thank you.
And interestingly, I've marked up that one as well, but with a question mark on actually what success was. Council land is protected for the benefit of residents. Well, that's not a measurement of success. There may be one, sat in the document before, but that's the whole point. It's one I absolutely agree, and I'm sure everybody here would have a different one, which they would say is the biggest priority to them. You know, and that's right, because we all come from different views, we come from different areas, and we have different experiences. So it's really, really difficult trying to pick out half a dozen, because some, you know, for example, if we don't include Farnham Museum, I think I could probably guess that an arm would come up and say, that's not right. But to someone who's not from Farnham, that would not be the priority. So it is really, really difficult trying to distill it down to a few. Councillor Coburn.
Yes, I mean, I agree with Councillor Reid, but it's for the same reason that I have my doubts all the way through. You actually, I was indicating, but you actually said the word, it's the how. It's missing everywhere. So, you know, as you say, if you are going to do that and you know, supervise what goes on in our land, you'll have a plan to do that. Now, who would it be, Kelvin, or who else have we got, who would be in charge of that? But, you know, to me, you would have to have your successes, you know, more playing pitches, but we'd need to have that how all the time. And I haven't got a how anywhere here. I don't know, well, that's not quite true, but there's so many of them. And it's not a question of whether it's, you know, the museum or open spaces or sports pitches or utilities. You know, if you don't know how you're going to achieve what you're going to achieve, I don't, you know, I find it very difficult then to see whether or not it worked. You mentioned communications. I mean, anybody who's done a document, you put down your whole program of communications. You don't just use a sort of vague, you know, we'll talk to the community. I mean, you actually work out a structure, and it's that lack. Now, I know I don't want to add too much more to this. It's detailed enough, but I think it's detailed in the wrong way. That's my issue with it. I want the how. I want to know how you're going to deliver this, and then to check it at the end of the time to make sure that the way you were doing with it was that you were achieving it was successful. Tick, carry on. Not successful. Oh dear, let's change the way we do it.
A couple more. Andrew Smith, you'd like to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I mean, I've been listening to this, and it's been incredibly helpful and illuminating. I think I've always benefited enormously from being at ONS committees, having my work scrutinised, the work of my service scrutinised, the task and finish groups most recently, where we've looked at the Thriving Communities Commissioning Fund. We're looking at the housing allocations policy this morning. And at the moment, and we had separate ONS groups in the past. Now we're doing ONS in a new way. This is just an officer perspective. And I just wonder whether, and I just suggest this, whether when we're scrutinising service plans, we might have to split the committee into subgroups. So for example, I sit down with 3 of you and you go through my service plan like there's no tomorrow with me. I would find that enormously helpful. The scrutiny would be rigorous, detailed. I could answer your questions or not. I'd have to go back to the drawing board. So you've got that detailed scrutiny from members on the work which I do, which I've always enormously valued. It's just a thought.
And I think that is an incredibly good idea, because to try and do 70 pages, it's not the right way of doing it, but 2 or 3 people could go through maybe 10 or 15 of the outcomes and ask those questions. So what does success look like? If you put failure, how are you going to, and you could probably do that, say across the whole board. I think it's great. I think this is the wrong way. It's just too much to try and get through and actually scrutinise it. I saw a few hands come up. I think Councillor Dixon was first, and then Councillor Forjewski.
Very quickly, I noticed that some of these are discretionary and some are statutory. I think the management team probably know what they're going to do in the next 3 months and the next 6 months. So I think this committee, we should be scrutinising what they're planning to do in 3 to 6 months' time, not what they're doing at the moment, or not what they're planning to do next week. We should assume they know what they're doing, but we can make a difference about 3 months out. So it's like a magazine. When you're publishing a magazine, this month you're looking at the issue in 3 months' time, not at today's issues. And so if we just had a list of what was statutory first and what they think they're going to be delivering between, where are we, January, April, May, June, then we could say, okay, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And then they can add it into their action plans for April, May, June. And that would be a good way of doing it.
I think the only issue is this is a plan for the year, and although it's a rolling plan, this is the plan that they're going to be working towards for the next 12 months. So Louise, do you want to
just on that point, I'd like to remind members that in the survey, in the performance report that you get quarterly, the service plan actions are reported on. So if anything slips, that's where you can see how the progress is being done.
Councillor Forjewski, and then we'll bring it to a conclusion.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'll be as brief as I can. I completely get where Councillor Else is coming from this, because it does look a bit overwhelming. And I would question the management team of the expectation of what they want from this committee based on a report that they've presented to us this evening, because it is utterly, without shadow of doubt, impossible to produce a good quality response to this document based on the time that we have. And when I look at the recommendation, I think we can voice a lot of what's been said here tonight, amending that recommendation to reflect that. But it's a question of damned if you do, damned if you don't. But I have great respect for our officers and for the gentleman who spoke last. I think what you said there was probably one of the finest comments that I've heard in a long time, that would actually produce a resolution to some of the difficulties we are hearing here this evening. Is the only way, the only real physical way we can do this properly is to divide ourselves into those members that are keen, and I'm sure we all are, I know for one I am, who would equally give up our time to come and talk to officers so we get a good in-depth opinion. So when we come here and we look at that, we know exactly what we're talking about. So I applaud your effort for putting your point of view across as an officer, because at the end of the day, you're key to all of this as well. Because although scrutiny is all about scrutiny, it's also an opportunity for us to scrutinise what you do exceptionally well. And that is equally as important as when we're not doing so well, so we can highlight those points. So I think the point in that recommendation, I would like to see the officers' comments put there as a recommendation going forward. Its subgroups are formed to ease the pressure on the amount of work that we're expected to go through. But I would also like, if I may, in writing, to have from the management team an expectation from them as to what they wanted from us this evening, based on a document that it is impossible for us to give a response to, given the time constraints. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mark.
I don't think saying we deal with it in working groups is a recommendation. That's probably more a resolution, because that's your, as a committee, that's your decision how you want to deal with this document, and you could resolve that as how you want to approach it for next year, and that's kind of, in a sense, that's no one else's business but yours, so it doesn't need to go anywhere else.
I don't care if we say the recommendation is our desire that we go into and put it down. I want it recorded. I think it's our recommendation to the executive that to fully scrutinise and to add value, which is what we want to do, that working with the people like Andrew and Kelvin, that we split it into different bits so we can give proper and considered feedback, as it was felt that this meeting, the sheer quantity and time restraints meant it was unworkable. Something along those lines. Anybody want to add to that recommendation? Carol?
It's just to repeat something you said earlier and to agree with you, because of the way these are structured, not just this item, but the fact that we're looking at such a broad sort of whatever the word is, a broad lot of items, we're bound to have an expertise or an interest in some more than others. I mean, there's such a broad spectrum, it comes at last, a broad spectrum of interests and items that I don't think that, you know, I think giving up some time for a subject that really, you know, is close to your heart. I mean, Councillor Darcy, you know, you've got your green spaces, Councillor Dixon's got a museum, and, you know, we've all got things that we're particularly keen on. And I think that probably is the way forward. Get us into little groups with the expertise and the interest to put the time in. Because if you are interested in something, you'll put in far more time than if you're not.
Councillor Dixon. Baker.
Thank you. Chair. I agree with that. And actually, I'm forced to reflect on the fact that in a way, it parallels what we had before we reduced the number of scrutiny committees. Forgive me, my voice is going. I haven't said that much. I think it's a hugely constructive suggestion. And I also support what Councillor Coburn has just said about our enthusiasms. And it is very true that if something really catches our imagination or our whatever, our commitment, that we are going to do that much more work on it. And so I think that Andrew Smith's idea is an excellent one.
Okay, well, I think we've got a way forward. It's not ideal, but I actually think the end result will be far better than us trying to trudge through another 30 or 40 pages of the same comments. And I would hope to think that Andrew and Kelvin and others and Richard will have a better product of our enthusiasm and our expertise, be able to say, but how do you actually deliver that? And those type of critical questions. So I'm hoping it's going to be a better product from this committee. Mark, you obviously and Louise are going to have a thinking caps on how we do this with the time constraints and everything else. But I think we are where we are with that agenda item tonight. Well, it does give us a little bit more time when we move on, which is good, but it does actually mean we're going to have to come back to this at some stage in whatever format. Because I'm guessing even if we do different groups, do we have to then bring it all together, just even if it's just a report with the various findings from the various groups? I don't know. I would imagine we'd have to do that, so it's endorsed then and agreed and supported. But I'll allow Louise and Mark to take that away the best way to, so we've done it constitutionally correct. Okay, so is everyone happy that we move on and go to the next agenda item? Now, I think Councillor Hyman was going to speak on this. Is he?
Councillor Hyman's apologised, he can't get a link.
Right, okay, it was on the thing and it was brought up, but Lisa didn't move on without going back to him. So again, just to reiterate, thank you for all the hard work that's been done. I know it might sound a bit disappointing for those who've done all the work, but it's a lot of work. It's a big document. We just need it into bite sizes now to really do the work. So thank you anyway on that. Okay, those who don't need to stay, you're more than welcome to go. Okay, so the recommendation on that one, just so we're clear, Mark, have you've got all our recommendations down?
Basically, I'd got the, and I'll reword this so it's a bit more elegant. I'm going to put it now. You wanted some kind of indication of how things would be delivered, links to any relevant action plans or policies, other things being equal, you'd prefer kind of specific quantifiable measures, and a sort of vision for what positive success, as well as to kind of counterbalance what failure would look like, and maybe a rationale for why we were doing something, picking up on Councillor Marriott's comments.
And that we're going to have these working groups that we will split the plan into workable sections, working with the service leads. So it might be quite easy just to break it down into service leads, and then we'll put out a request to the members here for where they would like to work and where they've got that enthusiasm to contribute. And Louise and yourself will come back, and if we have to do anything constitutionally about bringing those back, even if it's just a report that we agree to, so it's then formally come back to us and it's been signed off. Okay, so that was a simple one tonight. So we'll move on. Does anybody need a comfort break? If not, we'll just crack on. If someone needed a toilet, we can carry on and they can just quickly go. I have no objections them quickly going to the toilet, but we'll carry on because we've got introductions and stuff. Okay, so when we move on, we're on to item number 8, which is the Carbon Neutrality Action Plan, which is pages 77 to pages 128. We've got Fatini Vickers is online and we'll do a bit of an outline. And then I've got Councillor Seaborn who's got a couple of issues to raise, which I'm happy with. And then we'll open it up to the floor for questions and anything else. So good evening, Fatini. The floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you. The action plan presents the first update, the Carbon Neutrality Action Plan. Well, the report presents the first update of the Carbon Neutrality Action Plan. And the purpose is to invite your comments and your feedback and your observations for us to sort of make it more robust. The plan celebrates the progress we've had so far, but it also highlights the scale of the work that is still required. It was adopted a year ago, and although it is an action plan, it's more of a programme of works than sort of your conventional action plan, and it's had input from all the services or relevant services of the council. So it's a corporate piece of work rather than a piece of work that run by the sustainability team. Now, the update of the plan has some changes from the original document. We worked with a consultancy, with an energy consultant, and the purpose of that work was to verify the greenhouse gas figures that we report on for Waverley emissions, to produce a trajectory for us and also provide some indicative costs. It also helped us focus, I think, and prioritize where our work should be focused on over the next year. There are some new actions, there are some completed actions, but what I wanted to highlight, if I may, is that it is a live document. It was adopted as a live document that would be evolving all the time. It will never look, the same, and it is a snapshot of the here and the now. In fact, probably a snapshot of a couple of months ago when I started putting this information together. As funding and technology, comes forward and evolves and is available, then these actions will be developed further, and we will be able to quantify work more specifically as and when we do more detailed work on some of those actions of that program of work. The document has already had input from the Climate Emergency Board, which was formed a few months ago over the last year, and obviously following the comments from the ONS committee tonight, it will be presented to the executive on the 8th of February for noting and endorsement. And I don't want to take up more space, more time, going into the detail, but I'll welcome your thoughts and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Fatini. I say Councillor Seaborn's asked to speak, and Councillor Williams asked whether he could just have a brief moment to start. I did say to him I'd give him about a minute because I thought time might be, but I think it's only fair if one's allowed to speak than the other. So Councillor Williams, if you want to, I know you wanted to say something about the production, so if you'd like to speak now.
Yeah, I don't want to. I don't want to say very much, and I'll keep to the just a minute deadline. Really, to thank the. I wanted to kind of add my particular thanks to the sustainability team and Fatini particularly, who've worked incredibly hard on producing a document which is now much more detailed, much more robust than it was, but also it is clearly an organic document. So, any comments that come from ONS will be really helpful and really welcome. And I'd also particularly like to thank the members of the Climate Emergency Board for their comments, because obviously they are going into the iteration of this process, as well as the overview and scrutiny comments, and particularly the quite extensive comments that we've had from Councillor Seaborn and Councillor Darcy, who will no doubt want to make their contribution tonight. But many of those comments are already kind of in the process of being taken on board by the Climate Emergency Board. So that's all I wanted to say. I hope I've stuck to my limit, and I look forward to hearing comments. Thank you, Councillor Dealers.
No, my pleasure. Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Chairman. As Councillor Williams just pointed out, I'm a member of the Climate Emergency Board, and I had the chance to contribute some thoughts to the plan at last week's meeting of the board. So for the most part, I'm not going to replicate points that I raised at that meeting, but there are a couple of key points that I thought I'd raise again, because it'd be interesting to get the view of a different forum and to have these thoughts scrutinised to see whether this committee thinks it's worth flagging them to executive. First and foremost, I draw members' attention to figure 5 on page 106 of your papers. So this is the third trajectory put forward since 2019. The first one accompanied the draft plan submitted to the executive in March 2020. And that was a theoretical trajectory, which included decarbonisation of our housing stock and showed a linear decline. By version 1 of the plan, submitted at the end of 2020, housing had dropped out, and the trajectory showed a theoretical exponential decline to 0 by 2030. So I'm absolutely delighted to see that this latest version is based on data rather than theory, and is thus far more realistic. But the point I'd like to make and to ask you to consider is that the trajectory does not make allowance for the very significant temporary reduction in emissions from our leisure centres caused by them being closed due to COVID for 273 days in 2020 to 21. This resulted in a 62% reduction in emissions, according to the Council's published greenhouse gas emissions report. So it's reasonable to expect that when normal usage is resumed, And until the suggested installation of heat pumps takes place, the significant emission levels from leisure centres will return to its pre-COVID level. This is not reflected in figure 5. So the plan is setting the council up for criticism next year when the trajectory will be shown. This trajectory in figure 5 will be shown to be overly optimistic. So at the very least, I believe the plan should include some commentary to reflect this situation, but ideally an adjusted trajectory which reflects the emissions resulting from a return to a full leisure centre usage should be included. So Fattini's heard these arguments before. I'm not sure whether the comments that I made at the board will result in changes, but it'd be interesting to see what this committee considers about that. And then the second point that I made was to consider the high-level targets for organisational emissions on page 109 of your papers. And the target that worries me is the reduction in the number of car journeys for commute to Waverley by 60% by 2025. So to be absolutely clear, I fully support the intent of the target to reduce emissions from commuting. But if that is the case, then surely the metric should be to reduce emissions from commuting by 60% and not to reduce the number of journeys. Clearly, removing short journeys or journeys in small or electric cars will produce a completely different emissions outcome to removing long journeys in large cars. But this metric in the plan at the moment equally values meaningful journey reduction with inconsequential journey reduction. So using car journeys as a proxy for emissions reduction is too crude. And it could drive wrong organisational behaviours as well if reaching the 60% reduction target interferes with working towards an effective client-facing organisation deployed in locations driven by organisational need and individual need, rather than the dogma of getting staff out of the office. So as for my first point, it'd be good to hear what members of this committee think, but I feel quite strongly that those are two very important issues, and personally, I think the plan would be improved if they were reviewed, considered, and possibly action taken. So thank you very much, Chairman, for allowing me to talk.
I have one question which Fattini might be able to help me with. On page 98, so that's page 6 of the actual strategy. If I've got this right, we've looked at the emissions in 2015 as our baseline of 5,297 tonnes. And that is what we're going to use for our baseline from 2015, but we haven't started the plan till 2018 or 2019. So what happened between 2015 and 2019, we don't know how we've got to the figure, because we could have reduced it, but we don't know because we're using the 2015 baseline, which seems bizarre. Why haven't we had the baseline when we started the actual strategy in 2019?
Yes, Chairman, I'm happy to explain. So the reason why we chose 2015 as a baseline year, because that was the last year we had completed data for our greenhouse gas emissions. So for years 16, 17, 18, 19, there were some staffing gaps. So there wasn't really anybody to produce those figures. So that's why the information we have was not really accurate or complete for us to be able to have a baseline that's a bit more recent. So since then, we have been able to collect data for 1920. So we could be using 1920 as our baseline if we wanted to bring that forward. But that's, again, that's something sort of to be considered for the next version of the plan. But the reason why 15 was the year is because that was the last year we had completed data. Now, the reason why you can't see information on the interim years, I mean, I think we have some information on 17-18, but we're comparing the current year to a baseline year. So what happened in between is not necessarily relevant, because we are constantly comparing back to our baseline year. That's when we're reporting our reductions. So I felt that it isn't necessarily relevant to demonstrate all those other dates, apart from the fact that some of it is not there. So that's the explanation on that. If it would be helpful, I could also explain the reason why we've got the 2020-21 figures in figure 5 that Councillor Denis mentioned earlier on, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, carry on.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
So we have to work with the data that we've got available for the current financial year. So when we engaged APSI Energy, we were reviewing data for 2021. And obviously that was an exceptional year. We can't do anything about that because that was the year that was the most recent year that they were examining. Obviously, this is something that Councillor Seaborn has mentioned, and it's a valid point. So what we will be doing is allowing an explanation within the report why we've got the 2021 figures and the fact that they are, it is an exceptional year, not necessarily a true reflection. I think the covering report for this committee and the executive one does have a paragraph that explains that, but I think we'll be a bit more explicit in the main body of the plan. But that's what we have to work with, unfortunately, because that's the year we went through, and it will look different next year.
And I totally understand. It's just that there could be a big reduction between 2015, because I know there were lots of stuff done in that period, or some stuff was done, so we won't really know whether that's a certain percentage of that is history or what has been achieved through the plan. Can I just, Councillor Seaborn, I mean, having had that explanation, does that answer your question, or would it be better that we change our recommendations, or are you would you say that does answer it, or do we need to add a recommendation?
I think Fatini's, recognise the issue, and if it's going to be clearly documented in the plan, so that readers are referenced to figure 5, and it's made clear to them that this is starting from a typical point, and it is likely to change again when the following year's data appears, then people are ready for it. What was concerning me is that people are going to look at this, the third trajectory, and then go to the fourth trajectory next year and see it's changed yet again significantly, and it's causing major credibility gaps in the trajectories. We've had 3 so far, they've all looked completely different, and here we're publishing something that we know is going to change again next year. So if readers are ready for that because there's an explanation, then I think that's fine. It's quite a lot of work to go back and to rejig the trajectory, but yeah, if it's going to happen, then I'm happy.
Okay, so Fatini, if we can ensure that commentary is included, I'm sure Councillor Williams heard that as well, then we don't need to make a recommendation that should happen. If it's agreed that it will happen, then I'm satisfied that we can move on from that. But it's been noted that the concerns, I'm sure Mark that will be put into the minutes that was raised, and what the result is on that. Okay, so we're now 8:10, so I will open it up. Who would like to go first? Councillor Marriott.
Yes, thank you, Chair. There's a lot of information in this report, but I have problems with it in a similar way that we were discussing in the last item. There's a lot of, a total focus on heat pumps, and that concerns me. I don't see any comment about alternative technologies. Things like water, solar heating on roofs, for example. There isn't a costed business plan. How are you going to achieve what we are aiming to do? How does this fit into government policy? I mean, if we woke up tomorrow and read that the government was building a nuclear power station somewhere which will come online in 15 years, how does this affect our plans? And the technology in the power stations. I mean, I read that they are looking at implementing CO2 scrubbers or whatever you call them. How meaningful is that? How is that going to affect where we're going? And of course, at the end of the day, we could buy as much electricity as we want from the French. Most of their electricity is nuclear generated and therefore carbon free. We don't need to take any more action other than a heat pump is an energy efficiency source, not something that aids our carbon zero aspirations. So all these issues I would like to see in the report to actually explain why we're going down this particular path. I notice one of the comments that although the aim is to get carbon neutral by 2030, we are likely to need to have some offset whatever that is, building something, planting trees or whatever. If we're going to accept that an offset plan is needed, of course, the energy companies already say that they are zero carbon. They already do carbon offsets, if we believe what they say. So again, how meaningful is that? Do we believe what they say? If it's true, then our current power is already carbon zero. So again, it changes, I think, the focus of what we need to do with the council. Thank you, Chair.
Open it up. Councillor Darcy.
It was just a practical thing, really. The table, the first table, which is on page 87, it has no title, apart from it says, well, you can't read the title anyway on my version. And it's essentially the same table as occurs later on pages 117 to 125, but it's in a different order. So this one's ordered alphabetically. And unfortunately, it's got that annoying thing where the B1 is followed by B10 and B11, which is obviously not what's intended. Whereas the other table, which is all the same information, largely the same information without the progress rating, is in a completely different order. And I just think it's really confusing, and it should be consistent. They should present them both in the same order. Otherwise, you have to really wade through to find all of the relevant bits. So that was just a practical thing.
Okay, Mark, I'm sure you got that down as an action to feedback, as a recommendation. I think we can have that as a recommendation that it's reformatted to follow suit. So Mark can work some words. Councillor Else.
Thank you, Chairman. My comments won't be technical at all because I don't understand it. But I'm coming completely from a layperson's point of view, just looking at this and not really knowing. I know what it's about, obviously, but I don't understand the measurements and what they mean. Oh, except that it did seem to me that your point about 2015 measurements being used might be cheating a little bit. I did pick that up, so not that stupid, but that's by the by now. Page 81, it says it's essential that we plan the switch from gas to electric to provide heating. And then it says detailed feasibilities and costed proposals that could be then put forward for external funding. Are we not planning to do that? Can we not say will be put forward? Why could be? What, you know, how else are we going to fund it? That was just a small point. There's lots of small points like that I just picked up on, because that's 1.22. I think they should be, definitely will be put forward for external funding as soon as opportunities arise. 1.24, it says carrying out energy audits on our own building should be a priority over the next year. Again, it should say will be a priority over the next year. We either mean this or we don't. So, you know, the language is a little bit woolly for me, for my liking. If it's an action plan, then we want to see some action promised. If I can still go on, Chairman, page 87, we've got a grant. Can't see these numbers terribly well with my poor eyes, but on page 87, it does say that we have a grant officer who started in March 21. And we're supposed to be doing a review of home improvement policy in the private sector, which was put back until late 21. Is there any sign of that happening in this action plan? I don't see any sign of that happening. It's still in yellow, which means that it's probably, I don't know where it is. We can't tell where it is. It would be really nice to know how that's coming on. And then page 88, has work started yet with towns and parishes? That's apparently an important part of the consultation process and the work, but I don't see any mention of towns and parishes as yet. An engagement programme will be developed on page 103, but there's no mention of any work having been done on this so far with housing. I'm quite concerned about housing, our housing team. There's lots and lots of references to partners, lots of references to Surrey County Council and the work we're doing with them, but I don't see much about the work we're doing within our own organisation. I'd like to see a lot more about that. We've got nearly 5,000 properties that we're going to have to replace, change from gas to electricity. Are we working with our housing department colleagues? Are we that far yet? Or if we're not, we need to be, I would have thought. So an engagement programme will be developed. Again, when? So, I mean, I just found the whole thing as an action plan. I know it's a live document. I know it's a live thing, but I think Fatini hit the nail on the head when she said it was a programme rather than an action plan. To call it an action plan, I don't see enough action, if you know what I mean. I think it's too woolly for me. Anyway, thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you for that. I'm sure Mark got those points about the lack of action on housing, so we want some more clarity on that. Towns and parishes, their involvement, how it's going to happen is not really mentioned. Update on the member of staff and how, what impact have they had, so like a progress on that. And just some of the coulds, should be, shoulds. I think that is my sort of summary. If I've missed anything, please say. I think it was Councillor Dixon had a hand up.
Well, I'd like to congratulate the officers and on the creation of this report. It's really forward-looking, and it's great to have something in such great detail. I myself like to think I'm an early adopter of all green technologies. I've got solar panels on my house. I've got my roof, the loft insulated, all the rest of it. But I have to say the one thing I will say about heat pumps is I can't afford one. I don't think I can afford one by 2030. They're still very expensive. And it's very challenging to say that we're going to put heat pumps on 4,000 houses, because I don't think I think there's two things. One, I don't think the government grants are substantial enough, and I don't think that technology is mature enough. And I take the example of solar panels, and I know this from bitter experience, because I put solar panels on my house and I got the government grant, but I paid an absolute fortune for them. And now 10 years on from my getting my solar panels, they are much, much cheaper, and they're being mass produced out of China. And I would just urge caution on this, and perhaps if we could just wait to see if we can see this technology a bit mature, we could deliver this quicker and cheaper for our residents, perhaps not this year. The other thing I looked at is active travel. Now, I love active travel, and it's been a really important part of the Farnham infrastructure programme. And just to say one thing, Steve, you may have missed because you're probably not as closely involved in the Farnham infrastructure project as myself, but we had some very encouraging feedback from the consultants this month who told us that actually there's an awful lot of funding for LGP WIP studies and combined cycle and pathway studies. So when you've put your LG WIP in place, this is like a map or strategy for your town to say where all the pedestrians and cycle paths, etc., are put in place. You can then, that becomes your milestone to then go out to various bodies to get funding for the various bits of infrastructure that you need for active travel. So I think if we're going to focus on active travel, I think one thing this group should be, I know we're going to get an LG WIP for Farnham, but possibly we need one for Hazelmere, Godalming and Cranley as well. And I think there's funding available for that. So that's something I bring to it. The other thing I would like to say, and this is all going to make you all laugh, it certainly didn't make us laugh in Farnham, but it is a funny story. The consultants, Atkins, we love them greatly, did say they would reduce the volume of traffic in Farnham, and their brilliant solution, which didn't get accepted, was to close the car parks. I put it out there, folks. I'm sure we're not going to do that. So my thoughts are heat pumps are a bit expensive. Let's see if we can get some LGP WIPs for the other towns. And the volume of traffic, it's very, very difficult to resolve, as we know in Farnham. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I've got 3 people waiting. Got Councillor Baker, Councillor Marriott and Councillor Coburn.
Thank you, Chair. Well, Councillor Else reminded me of something that I was aware of actually from the Housing Scrutiny Committee of happy memory. And that was that the council employed as a consultant, I believe, somebody who was very well qualified to advise on reducing the emissions and, well, basically making the council housing stock net carbon zero. I don't see his name in this list, and I think Councillor Else was referring to someone who was really employed for the private sector housing initiatives for reducing, well, for domestic energy efficiency schemes is what it says here. And it may well be that this consultant's brief was expanded to cover that. I'm sorry to say, I just don't recall at this present moment. But certainly we do have somebody very able who is covering our need to address our own housing stock. And I don't really see anything in here about that. Maybe I've missed it, but perhaps it could be looked at to be included. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Marriott and then Councillor Coburn.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick one in response to Councillor Else's statement. In the housing ONS, when we ran that, there was a lot of discussion about these issues. The typical price to put a retrofit heat pump in, is it? I'll move closer. Yeah, the typical price to put a heat pump in as a retrofit is going to be something like £25,000. So you can work out 5,000 times 25,000 is a lot of money. So they're not cheaper, but not maybe so effective. But I mean, we're talking about a big sum of money if we go down this route with the heat pumps. So I'm not convinced, and that's why I want to see a costed business plan. Even if we borrowed the money against our housing stock, we could, if it's possible, I don't know, if we could raise that money, giving say 10% of our stock as security to the bank or whoever, there's a big interest charge. Where is that going to be? Where's that coming from? You know, I don't see the feasibility of going down this route at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, before I go to the next speaker, Mark, did you want to raise a point?
Yeah, I think it would be ideal if there was a finance colleague to comment on it, but I think because the housing stock we have is in the HRA, I don't think we could borrow against it in that way.
Sorry, I was going to just suggest, that was just a suggestion. If we wanted to raise that sort of money to install the heat pumps into our properties, I don't know how we do that. And also it won't be done overnight. I mean, remember, all other zero carbon organisations will be going down the same route probably. So there'll be a lot of pressure on the heat pumps, and I can't imagine the price will go down.
Okay, before I move on, can I just check? So you raised the fact that you haven't seen a costed business case. Are you asking for that to be a recommendation that's put back to the executive, that a costed business case would be beneficial to actually understand it? Just so I understand what you're asking.
Well, if we're doing a proper ONS role, surely that's what we should be doing. We need to see the rationale for going down this route.
Chairman, may I offer some clarity, please? Yeah, so the figure 5 that shows the trajectory, including heat pumps, that only refers to non-domestic buildings. So that's Waverley's operation. So that mainly includes the leisure centres. So the capital outlay is significant, and we are aware of that. But we are actively looking for funding opportunities, and in fact, we have already successfully secured some funding for installing an air source heat pump at the Memorial Hall. And also we have placed a bid for an air source heat pump project for Farnham. So that's sort of, we are actively looking for funding sources. And obviously, you know, any successes then will be reported back. In terms of housing, our housing colleagues, we are working very closely with our housing colleagues, and in fact, Peter David offered a presentation to the Climate Emergency Board last week regarding the work he's doing on the asset strategy work. He's also looking at producing an energy action plan, I think he's calling it, that it will look in detail to what we can achieve, what the target should be in terms of reducing emissions from our council housing and what that would look like. But that's still at discovery stage, and he's doing a lot of work with consultants and technical experts to plan that work out. We're not quite there yet, but he's working on that. There should be some initial reports produced over the next couple of months. So I thought I'll offer that just to give you some background information.
Okay, do you want to just come back and just make your position clear?
Yes, thank you for seeing it. Yeah, I mean, I'm aware that's where you're going on the non-housing side, but I think the bigger picture is for whatever you're doing with the leisure centres, the Memorial Hall, and so on. It is the I suppose it's looking at the long-term timeline of going down this route. And are we sure that the heat pump approach is the most effective in the longer term? I say the longer term in the sort of timescales that we might be seeing other technologies coming online from nuclear power stations, whatever. Are we happy that this is essentially, from my point of view, a short-term measure?
I suppose what we can't do is just sit still and wait to see what technology will give us. So, you know, we're looking to decarbonise our buildings and our operations as a council. That's the main commitment we've made, to be net zero carbon in our operations as a council. So we have to sort of explore building by building with the technology and the information we have right now, rather than, you know, sit tight and wait to see what technology, you know, will look like in 2 or 3 or 4 years' time. And there are there is external funding now that makes sense for us to take advantage of. Air source heat pump is one of those technologies that is being pushed at the moment. But we are doing every project that we look at in more detail. We're doing it, you know, with a business case on it, you know, on the back of it. So it is all sort of thought through, and that's why it's taken us so long sometimes to actually produce the details that the action plan potentially requires, and a lot of councillors feel that it's missing, because we need to do that technical analysis on a building by building basis, and it does take time, unfortunately. But yeah, that's where we are.
Yes, thank you. I'm not expecting you to sit tight. I mean, I think we should know or try and find out as much as we can what the government plans are. What is their intention? Can we fold that knowledge into where we're going forward?
Well, I just want to be thoroughly awkward. I do apologise, but I just really want to put in a word for the old, the infirm, the plumb awkward, and perhaps those who feel a bit bullied. You know, when I read some of these instructions, I think what we do as an organisation is crucial. You know, I think anything that we own, produce, do, we should be responsible for. I have no problem with that whatsoever. We should reduce our emissions, and you know, we should try and be individually and collectively as good for the planet as we possibly can be. But you know, I really am beginning to feel thoroughly bullied. I really am. Take that questionnaire we had recently about use of paper. I couldn't answer it after the first couple, because basically it was saying, what's wrong with you, madam? You know, you should be doing this. Well, I'm sorry, no. You know, I don't want to do it. And if you give me a series of questions, I'll answer them accurately. But you were basically saying in that questionnaire, you know, there must be a way that I can get you to want electronic copies. Well, there might not be. And why should there be? You know, if you can read better, if you've got any reason why you find it difficult to read on the screen, you should have a paper copy. And I find this the whole time with some of these things. You know, it's a little bit what Peter was just saying, the Vice Chairman, that, you know, if we're not careful, we'll just go hell for leather in one direction, then discover it's the wrong direction, go hell for leather. I think we've got to look at everything we do. As I say, don't have a problem with that. That is what we're here for. But when it comes to other people, I do get really quite worried about this emphasis on walking and cycling. I can understand why it's better for people to do a bit more walking. That's obvious. It's a very pleasant way of doing something. But cycling, really? You know? I mean, how many of us realistically are going to get on a bike, you know, when you get over a certain age? You're not going to do it. And I do think there are other ways that you can improve your lifestyle without actually having to get on a bike. And this funding that keeps being put into that pot, I think should be, you know, better used looking at all our residents, because we're not all fit, we're not all bike riders, you know, but we're not all people who, you know, destroy the planet. Remember, anybody of my age and older, there is somebody in this room, I think a couple of people maybe a bit older than I am. I mean, we were the generation that was brought up without, you know, plastic. We used to wash our bottles. We are the original recyclers, because after the war, there was nothing else to do but recycle. You didn't have anything, you know. And I find it really patronizing. Take the jump, which I notice is still in here. I think is so patronizing. You know, we encourage people to do things better by setting an example rather than patronizing them in words. That's really what I'm trying to say. And I really do think some of what we're trying to achieve, you know, we all understand the benefit of electric cars. I don't think that's necessarily the long-term future of motor. I don't know, but all I do know at the moment is I can't afford one. But all our money is going towards those people who can. And when we had that thing that we took out of the parking. So to me, you know, I understand why we've got to do it. I understand the issues for the planet, and I will do whatever I can in my small way to support. But I will not be bullied into something that I just can't possibly do and isn't going to be good for either me or the people that I represent. Because if I got on a bike, I tell you, by the time I got to the end of the journey, I wouldn't be any use to the resident I'd gone to visit. So, you know, I think moderation in all things is what I'm really saying. And when I read these things, I do get slightly aggressively anti in a way I'm not really, just because I feel it's constant at the moment. And these people who are lecturing me are sitting there with their phones here and their bottled water here. And I filled that up, by the way, before I came out. And, and they're telling me how to look after the planet. And they're graffitiing, which takes water, which is precious, to get rid of. So, I'm just having a little rant. I feel so much better. Thank you, Chairman. But I do think, we've got a lot of people in this borough who will not cycle and walk. That's all I'm saying, because they can't.
There is nothing wrong with a rant every so often. It's good for the soul. Councillor Foraszewski.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not sure I can follow that. But actually, Councillor Coburn makes some very convincing comments there, and whilst they're the ones that I won't expand on, but one of the things here is I think this document could go further to incorporate that. First off, I would say I'm delighted that we do have this document, and I'm delighted that it's live and that we can build on it and that it can evolve. I agree with a lot of the points that Councillor Mariam and Councillor Dixon, with regards to the heat source pumps. The technology isn't there at the moment, no matter how much we kid ourselves, it's not there at the moment. And we've got a long way to do that. But I just want to quote from page 107 that the path to becoming carbon neutral council. We are committed to becoming a carbon neutral council and doing everything in our power to ensure that Waverley is carbon neutral borough by 2030. We fully appreciate that meeting the target of net zero carbon by 2030 will be challenging, and it relies heavily on action beyond the council's control. That brings me back to Councillor Coburn's point, and it's exactly that. A lot of what we're trying to achieve here is outside of this council's control. And I think it's high time people were educated. I don't know how. It frustrates me nothing more to see that the human race, I despair at how we show such disregard. We overflow our bins at Christmas and then take them to bring in sites, and then we just dump the rubbish there, waiting for some of the poor soul to collect it. We roll down our windows and they throw garbage out of it. We just really need to think and be responsible for our own actions in what we do. We go into the stores in Guildford or wherever you go, and the amount of clothes we can buy now for next to nothing that is disposable, but that disposable item goes somewhere and it's into landfill. And as a borough, I think absolutely we need to be doing what we need. And I think we're a very small contributor. I think, what is it, about 1% or something like that. But that 1% shouldn't be ignored, because that's 1% that we can do something about. The other points I'd like to make is, again, come back to that responsibility. This is where I'd like to see this document look to encourage our residents to engage in some sort of educational initiatives that demonstrate some of the things that we would like them to do. And it could be, I go back again, Councillor Marriott pointed this has got so much to do with the previous item. There's no outcomes from it, or there's no actions from it. The green spaces is a great one. We could be writing to our residents associations. We could be talking to them about the benefits of getting the award of a green flag. And all these things really help to engage and do something for the environment. One thing in the document as well that worries me, again, it comes back to a subject we talked about earlier, is that's the deliverability. We've got planning issues, we've got resource issues, we've got Dunsfold Park, which is the elephant in the room and remains so because we don't know what the future is, but this hangs on it in many respects in its sustainability document. We've got leisure, it talks about the leisure centre of Cranley here. No one's a bigger fan than I am, but I need it to be delivered in order to make this a solid document. So I think, and when I look at some of the things in here, it talks about no resources, no resources, no resources. So I applaud the document. I think we all have to take responsibility outside of here for our own actions and what we do. And we all do our bit. I mean, I know I couldn't ride a bike to save my life either, but I do what I can at home to make sure that I'm responsible for what I do, for what I buy and how I dispose of it, because that is what I think is our role in making sure that the planet is as safe as it possibly can for our generations to come. So I applaud the effort of the officers for producing a document. I think it could go much further. I could think it could take a look at some of the things that Councillor Coburn have said, and I think it could envisage responsibility education and initiatives to include not just, and if you want to go carbon neutral, get rid of this building. I mean, this building is just, you know, I mean, it just oozes out electricity, gases, all the rest of it, heating on all the time, windows open, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's just not fit for purpose. So, you know, your starting point has got to look at, but you're one of your own assets, which is not doing the environment any good in any way, shape or form. They're my comments on it, but I don't take away from the fact that there has to be a starting point. I think this is a good starting point, but it is live. It can evolve and it should evolve. But I think the point I would really like to make is, apart from having a document where Waverley is leading, we should all, as individuals, take a personal responsibility. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Right, working through this, Councillor Dixon next.
Yes, thank you. When I said earlier on that I was an early adopter of green technologies, I perhaps didn't make myself clear, but actually the first time I put solar panels on my house was when I lived in Weybridge, and that was 20 years ago. Some of you know, my children are 19 and 17. So the first solar panels we had on our house were hot water solar panels, the tube ones. And so we put them on. I had 2 babies in the house. And for the 10 years we lived in Weybridge, we never switched the hot water tank on once. We had all the hot water we needed from the solar panels. And what's more, in the summer when it was hot, the whole system got backed up and we got hot water out the cold taps as well. Now the same kit that I think we paid 10 or 12,000 pounds for, which was 20 years ago was a lot of money, can now be bought for £1,000 as a DIY, less than £1,000 on Amazon. And that, I think everyone should have that because it's amazing. We now have electric solar panels, which is new, which we've had on our house for 10, 12 years, which is time I've been living, no, it was 11 years I've been living in Farnham. And that is, my husband is quite a fan. He likes to have his spreadsheets, and he came up to me just last week, you know, second week in January, and said to me, we were electric neutral today. And that's me and him both sitting at home, working at home. Admittedly, we didn't have all the lights on, but we did have all our tech on and all our mobile phone plugged in and a fridge and everything else. And we'd actually generated enough electricity on a cold January day to pay for all of our electricity needs. And actually most of the time in summer, we're generating vast amounts. And because we used to work in offices, both David and I, and so actually our house, for most of its 10 years, has been generating electricity for the grid because it's sitting there with solar panels on. We're not there because we were working and sending all that electricity back to the grid. And the third example is my sister is a green tech entrepreneur in California. I know that sounds a bit posh, but it's the fact. And she and her husband have managed, because he actually is an advisor in green tech as well. They've taken their house off the grid 2 years ago. And what they've done is they've got solar panels and then they've got batteries. And this is actually a bit of the cutting edge. And the batteries, there are problems at the moment because where the minerals where they come that need, obviously we know, come from terrible mines. But that is being addressed by Silicon Valley at the moment because big companies like Tesla recognize that we need to sort out the battery problem. And my sister and her husband found out there's also another problem in that you couldn't actually store your solar panel. They're in California, their solar panel from the day couldn't be stored to power the heat at night. And their tech startup has devised a piece of technology that sits between the solar panels and the batteries and allows you to switch on your power overnight. And they're developing their business on the basis of this, and they're doing extremely well. So I would say to Stephen, I think heat pumps are fantastic. They're still expensive. They're still too expensive for me. But can we just look at solar panels, because they are much, much, much cheaper. They really work. And it is another solution. Again, the batteries aren't there, but during the daytime, our housing estates could be generating a lot of electricity to offset it. Just thought you'd know.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ellis. You've been very patient.
Thank you very much. I will be very quick. I just want a point of personal explanation. My reason for wanting the people who are working on this document to be working with housing our housing colleagues, is because of the human element in all of this. I need there to be a plan that is described somewhere in this document at some time in the near future to say how they are going to approach making any changes that they have to make in our 5,000 council houses. It's nothing about money, not to do with money, not to do with what you're going to change it to, what you're going to put on the roof or what you're going to stick anywhere. It's how we're going to manage the issue of the personal human element. And there's a lot of people out there who will need to be managed quite carefully, I would imagine, before this work can be taken on. And I just want to have some reference to that element of the job. It's a big element and it's there and it won't go away, but there's no indication as to how any of that's going to be managed in this document. That's what I meant. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll pass over to Mark and then we'll try and summarise some of those points to make sure that Mark's got them down. But Mark.
I wouldn't want to promise anything on this score, but we do have the asset management strategy coming to due to come to the next meeting. My suspicion is that will deal with a lot of the kind of how we decarbonise the council homes. So that may well come up then.
Thank you, Mark. Now, I know Councillor Williams wanted to come back, which I will allow, and then I'll ask Councillor Seaborn, as you sit on both sort of committees, whether there's any other points you want to raise, and then I'll try and draw it together because we're coming up to 2.5 hours and we're going to be finishing in just over 10 minutes. So, Councillor Williams, is there anything else you want to say that hasn't been said?
No, I mean, I think there's been some very good points that have been made. I mean, I think the main point that I would make is that the concerns which have been expressed about the limitations of existing technologies may be valid, and there may be better technologies around the corner. And I take Councillor Dixon's point regarding solar panels as something which, you know, is a proven technology that can work. But I mean, because of the change in technologies, I mean, that's why we see this as an organic document that will change over time. But if we're talking about a climate emergency, we need to continue to make plans on a trajectory to carbon neutrality by 2030 based on existing technologies and amend that and change that as time goes forward. I mean, I did enjoy Councillor Coburn's rant, but I would just emphasise what I've always said to Councillor Coburn and to others, that active travel is not the only item on the agenda for moving towards sustainable transport, but it is one item, and developing an LC whip for the whole of Waverley is something that we are doing, and I do think it is important. And I would just quote back a comment that Councillor Coburn made when she was chair of Overview and Scrutiny for Environment, where she said that the climate emergency is not for everybody. And on that point, I would just beg to differ. So I think I would leave it at that, Chair. But obviously, if there are any other questions or queries, I'd be very happy to come back.
No, thank you very much, Councillor Seaborn. As you sat through the whole of this meeting, I'll give you the privilege to sort of give the last comment if you wish.
Thank you very much. It's very kind. The Housing ONS Committee, now defunct sadly, had the housing aspect of carbon reduction as a standing item, and Peter David used to come in, who's the asset manager, excellent chap, very realistic. He'd come in and we'd ask him questions at every meeting. I bring that up because there's actually quite a steep learning curve for members of this committee to go up. You know, I'm a scientist, but I'm in a completely different place to most people because I've been tracking the housing story from day one, and it's actually evolving in quite a nice way. people are expecting us to put a heat pumps in and solve the problem. It's only part of the story altogether. Heat pumps need to go into a house that's built to take heat pumps because they're nowhere near as efficient as gas central heating. All that is emerging from the planning work that Peter David's doing. So we've got money from the government to do trials next year. There's a lot of money being asked for in the budget for a major stock condition survey to fully understand the state of all our council housing. We do actually have heat pumps in several of Waverley's housing stock, and they're not doing a great job by and large. But Peter, again, has been out to find out what's working and what isn't. So it is emerging, and there's actually quite a coherent story, but it's quite complex. And as I say, because of having seen it evolving over the last 18 months or so in housing ONS, I feel a lot happier that it's moving in the right direction. The big challenge is actually delivering it in a time scale. Councillor Dixon's pointed out that technology might move on, and so have other people. Well, that is absolutely fine, because the pace that delivering heat pumps can be delivered at is not going to get us there by 2030 anyway. You've basically got to renew 2 council properties every single working day from today to 2030. It costs 25,000 quid a shot on average. To deliver that, well, sorry guys, that ain't going to happen. Other technologies might, as they come along. Hydrogen might be an easier solution, don't know. But in summary, sitting on both the Climate Emergency Board and being a sub for this committee and having been chair of Housing ONS, the housing story is actually evolving in quite a good, coherent way. We're probably expecting too much from it, though, at the moment. And again, there's a level of understanding that needs to be built up. So heat pumps aren't going to solve the problem. Heat pumps with retrofitted insulation solutions, solar panels, a whole gamut of things, which the council is looking to trial over the next year or so with government provided funding, will help provide an answer that will give us a better idea of where we're going in a year's time. So I hope that helps. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So just to summarise a couple of the other points, and Mark's got them. I'm sure you have, Mark. The point from Councillor Else about the human element needs to be built into the plan when you're talking about the 5,000 properties. So we just need to make sure that the human element is recorded. I think we all accept that this is a living document, but it's a living document that's in its infancy. So it will continue to develop. This is sort of the first bit, but it's going to change as time goes on. I think there was a concern, there was not really any outcomes or any smart outcomes to show what success is on the plan. I think it was raised about educating residents and that bigger piece of communication. I think that were the other points we raised.
Councillor Marriott wanted to raise point about about there being a costed business plan.
Yeah, that's what I said. It's about the cost of as it develops the cost of business plan.
Cost of business plan.
Have I missed any points we want to put on the recommendation? Councillor Else. And can I just say, I would not ride a bike in Alfold because the amount of lorries driving around is not in a million years would I get on a bike on those roads. Have I missed any points for it to be included? Councillor Dixon.
Sorry, did you say that the committee is urging them to look at solar panels in addition to heat pumps as an alternative?
Well, yeah, I think the plan's in its infancy, and we could expand that to say we're changing technology. We need to ensure that we're open to all sorts of new technology and not commit, Yep.
Can I just double check? I mean, did mention public education, but I think part of the subtext of Councillor Coburn's comments was that can quite often be that, or at least in her opinion, could be off-putting for some residents.
Appropriate communication at the right levels. Does that cover the?
Yes, because I mean, somebody earned a living getting information across. That there are different ways of doing it, and there are ways that just completely turn people off. I mean, it's just a fact, and I think you're right, Mark. I'm sure you can come up with a better selection of words, but any hint of patronising is just so off-putting. You immediately go the opposite way, even though you're instinctively pro something. It just really gets you. So, we're talking about examples, bit of humour. I mean, just generally getting the communication. But you do it best by living it, don't you? By the way we live as councillors and as a council, and then you hope that people will come along with your enthusiasm. But telling them, they're very naughty people, and that we know better. It's just so off-putting.
Well, it's right. A message to my daughter will be taken a different way to if I receive the same message. So I suppose it's a flexible communication style to reflect the makeup of the communities that we have. Because you're right. If you go into a village, the population is probably slightly different than if you went into a town centre. So the messages need to be appropriate to the community you're delivering it. So any other points? I've got Councillor Wojcicki.
Yeah, just very briefly, but I think again it comes back to the point of the responsibility and also just mentioning about the deliverability of some of the things that are in this report that might just make it not deliverable if these things aren't delivered. Huh?
Yeah, so a concern about the deliverability of some of these issues. So again, Mark can include that, and Councillor Darcy for the last point.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to correct something that Councillor Seaborn said. He said that gas boilers were more efficient than heat pumps. In fact, that's incorrect. They are far more efficient heat pumps because they produce, for every unit of energy that goes in, they produce up to 4 units of heat coming out, whereas a boiler does about one energy in, 0.9 out. So I think what he meant to say was they're more effective gas boilers, and that's to do with how a house is insulated and the flow rate that they produce, or the temperature they produce their heat at. So in other words, they're better at heating very badly insulated houses than heat pumps are.
I think that's how I read that.
Yeah, just wanted to get that correct.
Yep, okay. Right, I think so. Is everybody happy with those recommendations to be added on? And then Mark can do it. So agreed. We've got then one small item just to finish. So we've got a couple of minutes. Let's see if we can do this on time. So we've got number 9. Has anybody got a comment on number 9? You've had the documents. I'm sure have read through them. Unless I've got anything to the contrary, I think
I've got just one simple thing.
Yes.
On page 130, it says Carbon Neutrality Action Plan and Climate Emergency Action Plan. Are these 2 different plans, or I thought they were the same thing? 4.5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So they can clarify that. Councillor Else?
On number 9, item number 9, I just wanted to say very quickly, the affordable homes delivery strategy, it's build better, build more and build for life. I just think we ought to be very careful and think very carefully about the build for life slogan, because some time ago there was a great need for 3-bedroom houses, and people who thought they were living in their house for life, their family homes, were encouraged to move out to 1-bedroom dwellings, homes, and so the build for life message doesn't mean you're going to build homes for people to spend their lives in. It's just a little bit misleading, and I feel, and I think build for life means in general life, obviously, but people were encouraged to move out of their family homes that they'd lived in for many, many, many years, to go into 1-bedroom dwellings. Now, that in itself is another element of this report, because they're talking about building appropriate homes for older people, for vulnerable people, etc. Well, we've been there, we've done that. We've probably all got stories where we've had residents who are very upset because the one-bedroom dwellings can't be left void, and there wasn't enough of a take-up for older people to live in them, and so they were let out to other sorts of vulnerable people. They don't mix. I have some very unhappy residents who have some neighbours who they find it very difficult to live next door to, shall we put it like that. So I think we need to be very careful when we're saying we're going to build for particular groups of people. We're going to build, if you're going to build for older people, it needs to be for older people. And if you're going to build for vulnerable, other sorts of vulnerable people, it needs to be for other sorts of vulnerable people. So we need to be very careful, because we're reinventing the wheel here. I'm sorry, I'm not making myself very clear. It's because I'm trying to do it quickly and my brain won't keep up with my mouth. But we just need to be very careful, I think. We've done this already. We've done all this. We've had everything that's in here has been done and it hasn't worked out. So let's be very careful. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay. I mean, obviously, Alice, who has been one of the main people drafting this, is happy to communicate on it. So can I suggest, because I think you make some good points, and especially the points about where some of the neighbours have been moved in and the difficulties. Can I ask that you speak to her to do that? Alice has also typed out a little bit of information, which originally I was going to read out, but what I will do is I will give it to Mark, and it just talks about a bit about the communication, the role we play, where we can access the supporting papers and a link. If I give that to Mark, rather than just read it out, then it's attached to the minutes. So if you want to do a little bit more digging, you can do that from that. But please feed back to Alice. I don't think we need to do it tonight. You know, we're broadly in support the recommendation, and we will feed any additional comments so it can be tweaked, and I think that covers it then. We're including notes from Alice, and Carol's wishes to come up with another.
Well, no, it's just I didn't pick up any spelling points earlier, which I could have done because all the documents have been littered with them. But this says very clearly, Mr. Chairman, item not for discussion. So what are you doing? Disputing it?
Disputing, yeah.
It says very clearly, it's underlined.
Thank you for raising it and ending the meeting on a jovial point. These are quite taxing meetings, I think, and some of the topics are quite heavy going. So I thank you for bearing with us tonight. I think we've actually done the best of what we possibly could have with the agenda and the sheer quantity. So I am very, very grateful. And to Mark and Louise and everyone else who's kept us on track and everything else, we'll work out a plan, how to do that service plans into small chunks, and then we'll bring it back with just a sign off from each group that they're happy, and we'll take it from there. So thank you very much. Safe journey home. And